Did you notice that Marty St. came across as a little bent out of shape about something this week during one of his media availabilities? Well, we noticed it, and we're going to talk about it. On a week that started with a back-to-back Monday night, Tuesday night schedule, there were two big pieces of news that took place both on the second of those two games, the game played in Philadelphia. Cayden Primeau was recalled from the AHL and was given the start against the Flyers, and Sean Ferrell, newly signed to his ELC, was going to make his debut that night as well and officially burn a year off of his contract. The Cayden Primeau news, while it did sort of come out of the blue, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes, was more or less expected on Tuesday, being as the Canadiens announced his recall just before Monday night's game in Buffalo and announced that he would travel directly to Philadelphia. And then immediately some of the mainstream media beat reporters already had it out that Cayden Primeau would likely start Tuesday night's game. So it was kind of well known 24 hours in advance. On the other hand, in terms of Sean Ferrell, Marty St. after Ferrell had signed his ELC, St. Louis was asked at practice on Sunday whether or not Ferrell would draw into the lineup to make his pro debut Monday night or Tuesday night. And Marty St. Louis' answer at the time was basically non-committal. It was basically, we'll see. That answer was shored up a little bit on Monday morning at skate when Sean Ferrell didn't even practice or skate with the team on Monday morning, so it was pretty well known that he wouldn't be making his debut that night. Tuesday rolled around once the team had then traveled to Philadelphia, and it was announced by the Canadiens that Sean Ferrell would in fact be making his debut that night. They announced his new number, and it looked like fans and even plenty of the media were all abuzz by the fact that the latest hot prospect out of the NCAA would take to the ice in a Canadiens jersey for the first time on Tuesday night. But not everyone seemed to be equally excited about that fact. In his pregame media availability just 2 hours prior to puck drop in Philadelphia, Marty St. was asked about the decision to put Sean Ferrell in the lineup and what, essentially kind of paraphrasing here, what made him believe that Ferrell was ready to make his debut. And this was asked in French, and in French, Marty St. very curtly replied, "That's a question for Kent," obviously referring to General Manager Kent Hughes. The question was asked to Marty again in French, basically I think to try to clarify what he was saying, and again, St. Louis doubled down and curtly said, "It's a question for Kent." A couple of minutes later in this press availability, an English-speaking reporter then brought up the Sean Ferrell topic again and asked Marty a simple and perfectly fine question of, do you think that it's a good injection of energy for these young guys to come into the locker room, and does it inject some spirit and energy into everyone in the locker room, including the older guys, with all of this young talent? And instead of me trying to describe Marty St. Louis' facial expression and the way he replies, why don't we just watch?
A little extra excitement in the room.
I think we've had plenty of that this year. Yeah.
And so here's where we bring in behavioral analytics, because honestly, that's what our job is. Anytime you see an interview with a player, with a coach, with an owner, with a GM, behavioral analytics comes into play. And Marty St. in reading his body language and his tone in reference to Sean Ferrell, it became quite obvious that he was not intending to play Sean Ferrell Tuesday night in Philadelphia, and that it was Kent Hughes that made the decision to put him in. Why Kent Hughes made that decision, we don't know. Was it that if we're burning a year off of his contract and there's only 8 games left to play or so, let's not waste any time. Let's just put him in. It's against a team that's down as far in the standings as we are, so it's not going to hurt anything. Let's just get him out there. It could be that we'd like to keep his momentum going. We don't want him sitting in the press box for too long, so let's just get him out there. Let's get his feet wet. Who knows? It's obvious from the way Marty St. answered this question that this was not his decision, that this was the general manager's decision. Now, can we understand maybe he'd be a little miffed about it because really the nightly lineup is the coach's decision and coach's responsibility. So maybe toes stepped on a little bit with the GM forcing his hand. It broadcast to everyone that there was friction there between he and the GM in terms of this decision, at least. For me personally, I think Kent Hughes was making the right decision here. There's no need for Sean Ferrell to sit and wait. There's nothing to lose for the team. This kid is a prospect. You have a limited amount of time to if you're going to burn a year off of his contract, you have a limited amount of time for him to play. Just put him in. Let's not play games. And I'm sure everyone else in the room was equally excited for him and understands the business of hockey and understands the business of getting prospects into the lineup as soon as possible. And although I can understand if Marty was a little miffed that his decision as the coach about his lineup was overruled by the general manager, I do believe that he could have come out with a better answer for the press to kind of showcase a united front and simply say something to the effect of, internally we had a lot of discussions about this and we feel that it's just a good time for Ferrell to just get right into the lineup and get his feet wet and start to acclimate to the NHL game. Now, the second part of that is the Cayden Primeau aspect. In this same media availability, he said that Primeau hadn't played much hockey this year. He had come up once, but he didn't start, but that he'd been getting good, consistent reps and ice time and, time to take a look and see how he was doing. And that the fact that it was Philadelphia didn't matter at all, that whatever game this particular night was going to be would be a good time for him to start. I'm gonna call baloney on all of this. And actually myself, Rick Stevens, and Patrick Williams talked about this in great depth on this week's The Press Zone podcast. And you can check that out by clicking that link right up there. The Laval Rocket were on a road trip. They were in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, playing the Manitoba Moose. They played Sunday afternoon, and they were slated to play Tuesday night as well. They still are fighting for a playoff position. They are 1 point out of a playoff position with about 7 games left to play. In order for just taking a look and evaluating where Cayden Primeau is at, this would have been kind of the worst time to do that because they had to fly him from Winnipeg, bypass the team in Buffalo, and fly straight to Philadelphia. And then they turned around immediately after the game and flew him back to where the team is going to play in Rockford, Illinois on Friday night, so that he only missed the one game. Kevin Poulin started that game for Laval. They did win that game on Tuesday night. But the fact remains that if they just wanted to give Cayden Primeau a game to take a look at where he's at, they would have done that when both teams were in Quebec, when it was just a 20-minute ride on the metro to get downtown to the Bell Center. In my opinion, it is much more indicative that someone asked to see Cayden Primeau play. Was it a team in the NHL who already was slated to have a scout in the building at the Wells Fargo Center on Tuesday night, and that team called up Kent Hughes and said, I want to see Cayden Primeau play at the NHL level. Make sure he plays in Philadelphia. Can you do that, please? We also know that the Flyers, it's pretty well known that Carter Hart is going to be available this summer. And so maybe it was the Flyers who said, we'd like to see Cayden Primeau play in our building on Tuesday night. It's his hometown building. His dad was a captain here. That was likely a showcasing opportunity. My feedback forum question for you this week basically comes down to, what's your philosophy when it comes to these kinds of decisions? Do you agree that Sean Ferrell should have just gotten right into the game on Tuesday night? Leave your answers in the comments down below. As I just mentioned, Carter Hart is going to be made available most likely in the off season. I had some pretty strong opinions on why he probably would not and should not become a member of the Montreal Canadiens. And if you missed that video, you can watch that right here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.